They told me it was just a diplomatic mission to the underground facility. Standard protocol, they said, but when those scaled hands dragged me down into the depths, when I saw her sitting on that throne of bones, I realized I wasn't a diplomat. I was livestock. For 3 days, I witnessed what she really wanted from our kind, what they've been harvesting for centuries. I was there. I saw it. And before they silenced me, you need to know the truth. My name is Tyler Smith. I was 34 years old when they sent me down there. Former Navy intelligence, clean record, top secret clearance. The kind of guy they could trust to keep his mouth shut. Or so they thought. It was November 2019. I've been working contract security for a company called Meridian Defense Solutions for about 2 years. Good pay, simple work, mostly babysitting government facilities and escorting VIPs. Nothing that would keep me awake at night. That changed when Director Hayes called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. "Smith, we've got a special assignment for you," he said, not looking up from his paperwork. Hayes was one of those guys who'd been in the game so long he'd forgotten how to make eye contact. 3-day diplomatic escort. Underground facility in Nevada. I'd heard rumors about the deep sites. Every contractor had. Places that didn't exist on any map. Buried so far down, they had their own weather systems. But I'd never been assigned to one. "What kind of facility?" I asked. Hayes finally looked at me. His eyes were tired, like he'd seen too much and wished he could forget most of it. The kind you don't ask questions about. Standard protocol. You escort the diplomat. You keep your mouth shut. You collect your paycheck. Simple. The money was good. Really good. Triple my usual rate plus hazard pay. When I asked about the hazard pay, Hayes just smiled that empty smile and said it was for working underground. Something about the air recycling systems being hard on the lungs. I should have known better. 34 years on this planet, and I'd learned that when something sounds too simple, it usually is. They flew me out to a private airstrip outside Rachel, Nevada. You know the area. All those UFO nuts camping out by the highway, taking pictures of lights that might be experimental aircraft or might be something else entirely. The pilot didn't say a word during the flight, just handed me a sealed envelope when we landed and pointed toward a black SUV waiting on the tarmac. Inside the envelope was a security badge with my photo, one I didn't remember taking, and a set of instructions so basic they insulted my intelligence. Report to the surface entrance at 0800 hours. Follow all commands from facility personnel. Maintain radio silence unless ordered otherwise. Standard stuff, except for the last line. Under no circumstances should you attempt to document or record any activities within the facility. The surface entrance turned out to be a concrete bunker that looked like it had been there since the Cold War. No signs, no markers, just a heavy steel door set into a hillside about 50 miles from nowhere. The driver dropped me off and left without a word. At exactly 0800, the door opened. The man who greeted me was tall, pale, and spoke with an accent I couldn't place. European, maybe. His handshake was cold and damp, like he'd just pulled his hand out of ice water. "Mr. Smith," he said, "I'm Dr. Kessler. I will be your liaison during this assignment." He led me through a series of steel corridors that angled steadily downward. The walls were lined with pipes and cables, and everything smelled like ozone and something else. Something organic and unpleasant. Our footsteps echoed in a way that suggested we were moving through a much larger space than the narrow hallway indicated. We passed through 3 separate checkpoint stations, each one more sophisticated than the last. Retinal scanners, hand geometry readers, and at the final checkpoint, something I'd never seen before, a device that looked like it was analyzing my DNA from a simple finger prick. Necessary precautions, Kessler explained when he saw my expression. The facility houses some very sensitive research. That's when I met her for the first time. We'd reached what Kessler called the diplomatic level. The corridors here were wider, with actual decorations on the walls. Artwork that looked ancient and definitely not human in origin. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long. Symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't staring directly at them. Ambassador Chun was waiting in a conference room that looked normal enough, except for the complete absence of windows and the subtle vibration in the floor that suggested heavy machinery running somewhere below us. She was a small Chinese woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with eyes that looked like she'd seen things that would break most people. "Mr. Smith," she said, standing to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, but I could feel her fingers trembling slightly. "I trust your journey was uneventful." "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to ensure your safety during the negotiations." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Safety? Yes. We'll see about that." Kessler left us alone to review the mission parameters. According to the briefing materials, Ambassador Chun was here to finalize a treaty that had been in negotiation for over a decade. The other party was described only as allied subterranean representatives. The language was deliberately vague, full of diplomatic doublespeak that told me absolutely nothing about who we were actually dealing with. "Ambassador," I said, "can you tell me anything about the security situation down here? Potential threats I should be aware of." Chun was quiet for a long moment, staring at the briefing papers without really reading them. When she looked up, her expression had changed. There was something in her eyes I recognized from my Navy days. The look of someone who'd volunteered for a mission they weren't sure they'd survive. "Mr. Smith, how much do you know about the history of human civilization?" The question caught me off guard. Written history? Or taught in schools? How far back does it go? "I don't know. 5,000–6,000 years." She nodded slowly. "And what do you suppose happened to all the time before that? The 100,000 years when humans were supposedly just waiting around, learning to make fire and hunt animals, but never developing anything more complex." I wasn't sure how to answer that. "Evolution, I guess. Things take time." "Yes," she said. "That's what I used to think too." Before I could ask what she meant, Kessler returned. With him were two security guards I hadn't seen before. They wore standard tactical gear, but something about them seemed off. Their movements were too smooth, too coordinated, and their eyes reflected light in a way that human eyes shouldn't. "It's time," Kessler announced. "The representatives are ready to begin." We descended further into the facility. The elevators here were industrial grade, built for heavy loads and serious depths. My ears popped twice during the descent, and I could feel the temperature dropping with each level. The walls changed too, from concrete and steel to something that looked like natural stone, except for the perfect geometric precision of the cuts. "How deep are we going?" I asked again. This time, one of the guards answered. His voice had a strange quality to it, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Deep enough to reach the old places." The old places. I didn't like the sound of that. When the elevator finally stopped, we were somewhere I couldn't even estimate. Deep enough that the air tasted different, metallic and thin. Deep enough that the silence felt absolute, pressing against my eardrums like water pressure. The corridor we entered was carved from solid rock, lit by fixtures that cast shadows in directions that didn't make geometric sense. Our footsteps sounded different here, muffled and distorted. Ambassador Chin walked beside me, and I could hear her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She gripped my arm suddenly, her fingers digging into my sleeve. "Mr. Smith, I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens in there, whatever you see, you cannot let them know that you're afraid. They can sense fear. They feed on it." Before I could ask her to explain, we reached a massive stone door covered in those same impossible symbols I'd seen upstairs. But down here at this depth, they seemed to be moving more actively, writhing and shifting like living things. The door began to open, stone grinding against stone with a sound that seemed to come from inside my own skull. Beyond it was darkness, so complete it seemed solid. And from that darkness came a smell that made my primitive brain scream warnings I didn't understand. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound that wasn't quite language and wasn't quite music, but somehow conveyed meaning anyway. It was calling us forward, welcoming us into the dark. Ambassador Chin straightened her shoulders and walked forward. I followed because that was my job. I had no idea I was walking into a place that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about the world. The chamber beyond that stone door wasn't built by human hands. I knew that the moment we stepped inside, even before my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. The walls curved in ways that hurt to follow, rising into darkness, so complete it seemed to swallow the weak illumination from fixtures that looked like they'd been carved from bone. The smell hit me next. It wasn't decay exactly, but something older than that, like the scent of deep caves mixed with something organic and alive, breathing in the darkness above us. Dr. Kessler and the guards flanked us, moving with that same unsettling coordination I'd noticed earlier. The representatives have been preparing for this meeting for some time, Kessler said, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. They are eager to finalize the arrangements. We moved deeper into the space, and I began to make out details that my mind struggled to process. The floor beneath our feet wasn't stone. It was some kind of metal, polished to a mirror finish, but covered in symbols that seemed to shift and flow when I wasn't looking directly at them. The walls were lined with alcoves, each one containing objects I couldn't identify. Crystalline structures that pulsed with their own internal light. Metallic devices that hummed with barely audible energy. How long has this facility been operational? I asked, trying to keep my voice professional. One of the guards, the one who'd spoken about the old places, turned his head toward me. In the strange lighting, his eyes reflected like an animal's. Since before your kind learned to make fire. Before I could process what that meant, we reached the center of the chamber. Here, the ceiling opened up into a dome that disappeared into darkness above us. In the center of the space was a circular platform surrounded by what looked like a moat filled with some kind of luminescent liquid that cast everything in a sickly green glow. And on that platform, waiting for us, was something that made every instinct I developed in 34 years of life scream at me to run. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, with a build that was almost human but not quite right. Her proportions were off in subtle ways that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on her. Her skin had a scaled texture that seemed to shift between green and gold in the strange light. But it was her face that made my mouth go dry with terror. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. Features that might have been attractive on a human being, but stretched and modified in ways that belonged in nightmares. Her eyes were too large, completely black, and when she looked at me, I felt something probing at the edges of my mind, like cold fingers testing a locked door. Ambassador Chun, the creature said, and her voice was like nothing I'd ever heard. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating in my chest and making my bones ache. Welcome back to the deep court. Welcome back. Shouldn't have been here before. Your Majesty, Shin replied, and the formal tone couldn't hide the fear in her voice. Thank you for agreeing to continue our negotiations. The creature, the queen, apparently, moved with a fluid grace that was hypnotic and terrifying. She descended from the platform without using any visible steps, simply flowing down through the air until she stood before us. Up close, the scent of her was overwhelming, like copper and ozone and something else that made my primitive brain want to curl up and hide. And you brought another guardian, she said, those black eyes fixing on me. How thoughtful. I felt something touch my mind then. A presence that was ancient and hungry and completely alien. It rifled through my thoughts like someone flipping through files, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Images flashed through my consciousness. My Navy service, my work with Meridian, my apartment back in Virginia, my ex-wife Sarah, even memories I've forgotten I had. All of it examined, cataloged, and filed away in seconds. Tyler Smith, the Queen said, though no one had introduced me. 34 years old, former military intelligence, clean psychological evaluation, no family to miss you if something unfortunate were to happen. The casual way, she said, it made my blood freeze. I tried to speak, to assert some kind of control over the situation, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. What do you want? She smiled then, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. The same thing we have always wanted, Mr. Webb. What was taken from us? What was promised to us long ago when your species was young and knew its place? Chun stepped forward, her diplomat training overriding her fear. Your Majesty, we've discussed the terms. The surface governments are prepared to honor the ancient agreements. But we need assurances about civilian populations. Civilian populations. The The Queen's laugh was like breaking glass. Such a quaint concern. Tell me, Ambassador, do you worry about the civilian population of an ant colony when you build a house? The comparison hit me like a physical blow. We weren't negotiating partners here. We were insects discussing terms with something that saw us as barely worth noticing. The breeding programs have been successful, Dr. Kessler interjected. The genetic compatibility rates have exceeded projections. Breeding programs. The words hit me like ice water. I looked at Chun, saw her face go pale, and realized she knew exactly what he was talking about. Indeed, the Queen said, moving closer to us. Though the yields have been disappointing, your species lacks the robust genetic diversity we require for optimal hybridization. She gestured to the guards flanking us, and I finally understood why their movements had seemed so wrong, why their eyes reflected light like animals. They weren't human, not entirely. They were something in between, products of whatever breeding programs Kessler had mentioned. The new protocols should improve efficiency, Chin said, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was discussing. Urban population centers offer much larger selection pools than the rural harvesting operations. Harvesting operations, selection pools, urban population centers. They were talking about people like livestock. The Queen moved to a section of the wall covered in what looked like monitors, though the displays showed images that hurt to look at directly. Cities from above, marked with symbols and numbers. Population densities, genetic markers, statistical analyses of human breeding stock. The resistance has been minimal, she continued. Your media does such an excellent job of discrediting witnesses. Alien abductions, they call them. Such a useful term. It makes the survivors sound insane. Survivors. Not all of them were survivors then. Which brings us to our current problem, the Queen said. The old agreements were made when your governments were smaller, more controllable. Now you have too many factions, too many competing interests. Some of your leaders have begun to question whether the bargain is worth keeping. She turned those black eyes on me again, and I felt that mental intrusion return, stronger this time. Images flooded my consciousness, but these were my memories. These were hers. I saw human cities burning under a different sky. Primitive settlements where people cowered in caves, while creatures like her hunted in the darkness above. Treaties signed in blood by leaders whose names have been lost to history, trading protection from annihilation for regular tribute. We ruled this world once, Mr. Smith, she said, her voice now coming from inside my own head. Your ancestors were our servants, our food, our playthings. We allowed you to spread across the surface because it served our purposes. But now you've grown numerous enough to be useful in other ways. The images continued. Laboratories filled with human subjects in various stages of genetic modification. Hybrid offspring that combined human intelligence with reptilian strength and longevity. Underground cities where humans lived in carefully maintained breeding populations, never knowing that the surface world existed. And now, she said aloud, we come to why you're really here, Mr. Smith. The platform in the center of the chamber began to rise, revealing machinery beneath it that defied easy description. Crystalline structures interfaced with metallic devices, all of it humming with energy that made my teeth ache. In the center of it all was a chair that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Organic curves that suggested it was designed for something other than human anatomy. Your psychological profile indicates exceptional resistance to mental modification, the Queen explained. Most humans break within hours of deep conditioning, but you might last weeks, possibly months. Ambassador Chin stepped forward, and I saw something in her expression that made my heart sink. Not surprise, not horror, resignation. The conditioning chamber is prepared, she asked. It has been waiting for him since you first sent us his genetic profile, the Queen replied. They've been planning this. Chun, Kessler, maybe even Hayes. I wasn't here to protect anyone. I was here to be delivered. The hybrid guards moved closer, and I finally found my voice. Wait, Ambassador, what the hell is going on here? Chun looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. I am sorry, Taidev, but the agreements require regular tribute of suitable candidates. Your military record, your psychological resilience, your lack of close family connections. You fit the requirements perfectly. Requirements for what? Breeding stock, the queen said simply. The guards reached for me, and my training finally overcame my terror. I spun away from their grasps, grabbing Chin's arm and pulling her toward what looked like another exit. I drove my elbow into the first guard's solar plexus. The impact felt like hitting a brick wall wrapped in skin. He barely flinched, just grabbed my arm with fingers that were too long and too strong. The second guard's claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my shirt and into skin. The cuts burned like acid. My left arm started going numb. Tyler, stop fighting, Chun gasped. The agreements protect billions of people. The tribute system prevents full-scale harvesting. You mean slavery? I mean survival. This isn't a war we can win. The queen laughed. Your species exists at our sufferance. The old agreements ensure that most of you live peaceful, ignorant lives on the surface. The alternative is a return to the hunting times. The numbness was spreading. The 3 guards were closing in. I looked around desperately for anything I could use. Then I noticed the symbols on the floor, the ones that seemed to shift. They weren't just decorative. They were forming patterns, like a control interface. I made a desperate gamble. I dropped into a crouch and slammed my good hand down onto the nearest symbol. It flared with light, and immediately the entire floor began to vibrate. The guard stumbled. The queen hissed, an actual snake-like sound. He's activated the security protocols, Dr. Kessler shouted. The chamber will initiate lockdown procedures. The walls began moving, shifting. The alcoves rotated, and a section of wall opened to reveal a corridor beyond. It was dark. I had no idea where it led, but it wasn't here. The guards were recovering their balance. This was my chance. I hauled Chin her feet and started running toward the corridor. Behind us, the queen was saying something in a language that hurt to hear. The guards were following, but the unstable floor was slowing them down. We reached the corridor entrance just as the reconfiguration began to slow. I could hear the queen's voice in my head, promising terrible things. But her mental grip was weaker here. Tyler, stop! Chin gasped as we plunged into the darkness. You don't know what you're doing. These tunnels, they go deeper, into the old places. Places where even the queen doesn't have full control. Good, I said, pulling her deeper into the corridor. Behind us, I could hear the guards beginning their pursuit. Maybe we can find something down there that's more afraid of them than we are. The corridor stretched ahead into absolute darkness. Every step took us further from any hope of backup or extraction, but also took us further from that glowing chair. In whatever conditioning process they planned for me, I'd take my chances in the dark. That was 43 years ago. I spent the next 4 decades working for what they call the Oversight Committee, investigating incidents like the one Chun and I survived, managing the interface between human governments and the various non-terrestrial intelligences that have been operating on Earth longer than most people can imagine. Chun worked with me for 30 years before retiring. We don't talk about the work anymore. Some things are too heavy to carry in casual conversation. The facility beneath the Mojave was officially attributed to a geological event. The queen and her people moved to deeper installations where the breeding programs continue under enhanced security protocols. And those signals from Proxima Centauri that NASA announced, those aren't first contact. They're part of a conversation that's been going on for centuries. The statute of limitations on my security clearance expired 30 days ago, which means I can finally tell this story without violating federal law. But there are other laws, older agreements that technically still apply. By speaking publicly about what I experienced, I'm probably signing my own death warrant. So why am I doing this? Because the thing the Queen showed me in those 3 days, the intercepted transmissions about what's coming for both our species, that timeline has accelerated. The signs are everywhere if you know how to look for them. Whatever was decades away in 1981 is no longer decades away. I'm 68 years old now. I've spent more of my life keeping secrets than telling the truth. But I can't die with this knowledge locked inside my head. The Queen told me her people had been waiting beneath the earth since before human civilization began. What she didn't tell me is that they weren't the first ones here and they won't be the last ones to leave. The real question isn't whether any of this is true. The real question is whether you're ready to accept that everything you think you know about humanity's place in the universe has been carefully constructed to keep you from panicking about our actual situation. They told me to forget what I saw down there in the Queen's realm, but the genetic modifications they exposed me to made that impossible. Every detail is still crystal clear in my memory, getting sharper with age instead of fading. And now, neither will you.